So I have basically nothing to do because my summer exams have been cancelled due to this stupid outbreak, so I was searching the internet last week for something good to play. I found two things. Monster Hunter World, which is, well, it's a lot like a lot of other games I've played. You know, it was inside my comfort zone, it was nothing extravagant or exciting. But I really did want to play something that was outside my comfort zone, something that I'd never played the likes of before. So, when I found this, well, I was certainly interested. It was on sale, I bought it without a second thought and installed it. Now, this game is incredible, and I fully intend to try and explain why. I had a look online for reviews to see what other people thought of it, and I found this. Try Thumper if you can't handle Dark Souls. Okay. No, it's fine. It's a completely hollow statement that means basically nothing and could be used anywhere. Try The Sims if you can't handle Dark Souls. Try Fallout 4 if you can't handle Thumper. Try fucking Heroin if you can't handle Dark Souls. Technically, the sentence is okay, but it's useless to try and sell someone on a game based on a prior dislike of another completely different title. When the review continues to reference Dark Souls in a review about Thumper, I realised that I did actually want to talk about this, because this isn't fair. This isn't fair on Thumper or on Dark Souls. Why? Well, let me tell you. I think it's important to establish a baseline to work from in situations like this, because, otherwise what are you going to build from? So, first of all, I'll gush over Dark Souls for a bit, and then I'll talk about Thumper for a while. I'll explain the game, I'll gush over it, maybe even point out some criticism. So I think this is supposed to be a review, I'm not quite sure. And then I'll sum it all up and tie it up in a neat little bow, just for you, David Roberts. Wow, this guy really likes Metal Gear Solid 5. Oh dear me. Oh dear, David. New Game Plus is completely optional, right? You don't have to... You can actually just finish a game and be done with it. You don't have to just play it over and over again on New Game Plus. David, do you want to talk to someone about this? Sorry, I'll leave him alone. So what is a Dark Souls-like game? Well, what's Dark Souls like? Dark Souls incorporates Metroidvania-style exploration and treasure hunting with challenging duel-based combat to create the feeling of being on an adventure against insurmountable odds in a fantasy land the likes of which you'd see in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, often featuring both dungeons and dragons. It's pretty cool. I'm into that. The game is seen by normal people as extremely difficult, and this is simultaneously correct and a bit of a misnomer, because yes, when you first start out, Dark Souls is like clamping a lobster to each testicle and trying to sing the Sisters of Mercy without your voice quavering, but it's not just the combat. The combat itself is a set of factors from other bits of gameplay. It's not just as easy as one or t'other. Is it the combat? Is it the exploration? Is it the boss fights that make it hard? No, all of these things tie into each other. But yes, superficially, it's the combat. However, there's lots more that makes a Dark Souls-like game. For example, thick, oppressive atmosphere, huge amounts of lore and environmental storytelling, like the bit in Dark Souls 3, when you find Loretta's bone on a dangling corpse in the undead settlement, and realise that that's the corpse that Greyrat the Thief was talking about, and you realise that she's dead, and it's actually really sad, in a hugely subtle, clever way. It's that kind of environmental storytelling that elevates it above other games of its ilk. The other thing that makes a Dark Souls game is a lack of objectives and objective markers. You just kind of explore, and you can become extremely lost in games like Dark Souls 1 or Bloodborne, and it's pretty stressful not knowing whether you'll round the corner to see a boss fight or a bonfire. The limited healing and stamina management feed into the combat. Limited healing is nothing new in video games. In fact, it's one of the most basic forms of creating challenge ever heard of by man. Limit the amount of health that the player has, so that they will eventually, or they are at risk of eventually, dying. However, in a lot of superficially similar action games like Devil May Cry, the combat is fast-paced and based on instantaneous action and immediately seeing dividends on your button input. In a Soulsborne game, however, you've got stamina. A chunk of stamina is used every time you do something, basically. Every time you attack, every time you dodge, every time you try and run. You've got a limited amount of stamina. It means you can't exactly rely on getting a hit in, stun-locking your enemy, and just mashing attacks until they fall over. Well, at least not until Dark Souls 3. You have to be aware of what's around you, and you have to be aware of how much stamina you have available to invest in your next assault. You need to have enough so that you can back out if you need to, but you also want to make some kind of impact on your opponent. However, is this the only thing that makes a Dark Souls game hard? I mean, yes, I suppose so. But there's a lack of difficulty select, and that means that you're always getting the intended experience in Dark Souls. But also the amount of enemy health and damage. It's roughly similar to yours. You can kill an enemy in 2 hits, or an enemy can kill you in 2 hits. And especially, some of these enemies hit really hard. I mean, the pot dudes in the Undead Settlement in Dark Souls 3, they hit hard and do bleed damage at that. They properly pummel you, and that makes a game hard. But a Dark Souls game needs lots of things. It needs a thick atmosphere, deep environmental storytelling, and about 17 exercise books of lore for you to ignore. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice is a bit more like Aragami or Assassin's Creed in a way. The combat is more based around countering, stealth, and you've got a greater emphasis on mobility, allowing you to get up buildings and circumvent your opponents. However, despite the slightly simpler story and really quite different gameplay, Sekiro is still Dark Souls-like because it's difficult and it has a thick atmosphere, an incredibly well thought out story and lore, and just enough of a touch of that Miyazaki genius and strangeness to really elevate the experience. Thumper is a difficult rhythm game. You die in 2 hits. It's hard, and there's a very thick atmosphere. I mean, Thumper lives and dies on atmosphere. But that doesn't make it the Dark Souls rhythm games. Hell, Through the Fire and Flames on Guitar Hero 3 was difficult. Does that make it the Dark Souls of Guitar Hero 3? I fucking hate the internet. I hate all of you. Why am I not surprised? Wait, hang on a second. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh fucking dear, you absolute fuck. Excuse me. A couple of seconds ago, I said Thumper is difficult and does have a thick atmosphere, but this doesn't make it the Dark Souls of rhythm games. Now, this may actually seem at odds with what I said about Sekiro, but I actually think there's way more detail to it than that, and it's extremely hard to pinpoint what makes a Dark Souls game good and what makes a Dark Souls game, you know, because there's so much to it that combines into this one huge experience, this Lovecraftian horror, this feeling of existential dread that we're going to die. It's so key in a Dark Souls game that it wouldn't be right without it, but at the same time it wouldn't be a Dark Souls game without the huge challenge and feeling of reward that you get, and how the enemies respawn when you rest at a checkpoint. That's a tiny thing, but still, that has an effect on the feeling of the game. Those alone don't make a game good. To an extent, Lords of the Fallen has those characteristics as well. But we all know how that went, don't we?
As I said, to deliberately evoke a popular game so heavily always feels like a very illogical move because the comparison is as unavoidable as it is unfavourable. But even by its own merits, Inlets of the Hedge Trimmer falls short, plagued by invisible walls as well. I have fond memories of my attempt to sneak up and backstab on a guard being foiled by him cunningly having stood on the far side of a slight incline in the ground. All in all, Fallen is a game pushing to do too much with not enough, spackling the holes where creativity fell short until the spackle is all I can see.
Subject lesson in bad versions of this, check out Lords of the Fallen, a game that was very clearly made by people who saw that Dark Souls was popular and wanted to make one of those, but didn't quite figure out that it actually takes a lot of effort to make this kind of game fun. I've beaten this game all the way through twice. This game is terrible. Even the basic sword weapon is so slow and deliberate that it becomes a chore. There's no light running attack at all. Your guy just stops dead in his tracks. The controls are so slow and clunky that I was sure my computer was simply too slow to run it, but no, this is just how the game moves. There are fast weapons, but they never escape the damage curve, and you're basically either pressing the button to immediately swing but dealing very little damage, or dealing more but waiting days for something to connect. I'm used to a weapon having a light attack, which is quicker, and a heavy attack, which is slower. When a weapon has a slow attack and an even slower attack, the entire feel of the game is broken. Greatswords are basically impossible to use, except for some reason the running heavy attack comes out really fast, making it essentially the fastest move in the game. This one move carried me until I discovered the broken shield bash mechanic. I'm actually starting to worry about the fact I beat this game twice. I think that says something about me. Weapons in Dark Souls are balanced so well that you don't even notice until this aspect is missing.
So, making a game fun takes effort. Wowee! Never knew that. But I can't help but keep coming back to the idea that Thumper can't be the Dark Souls of rhythm games just because it's atmospheric and difficult. Like, it can't be. Okay, so now that we've established a baseline and understand what makes a Dark Souls-like game, the kind of core ingredients of a Dark Souls game, now let's talk about something else entirely. Thumper is a rhythm game, much like... Okay, it's not really like any other rhythm games out there. You play as a metallic scarab beetle, flying on a metallic neon rail, very fast, with many obstacles. There's basically no context for anything in Thumper, so I like to imagine that the scarab beetle is outrunning his ex-wife Karen, who is coming for child support payments even though he went broke 7 months ago. Hello?
No, but did it feel good though?
It's Karen. Run. Okay, excellent. Now that our characters and stakes are set up, we can get started on the gameplay. Thumper has excellent gameplay progression. It starts off like this. And slowly evolves until we have this. Thumper is a very simple game. It does one thing, and it does it very well, which makes it hard to compare to something like Dark Souls, because in Dark Souls there's so much content to try and account for. The complexities of combat in damage, resistance, elemental effects, equip loads, speed. Are you fat rolling? Are you nimble? Do you attack quickly and do lots of little bits of damage, or do you attack slowly but hit like a fucking runaway train? How are you leveling up? Are you upgrading your weapons and armor? Are you adding elemental effects to your weapons? Or whose quest lines are you following? There is so much gameplay and story and content to focus on at any one time. It's by no means overwhelming, which is actually a testament to how extremely well done it is, because I hardly ever think about all these hundreds of thousands of different possibilities most of the time, which it's very impressive. However, in Thumper, there is one aspect to gameplay: motion. Motion controls whether you live or die, and that's kind of it. There are bosses, but they're the equivalent of stepping on 3 pressure plates sequentially and then it dies. But this doesn't by any means make the game easy or low effort, because, well, and it's extremely difficult at times, and there is a lot of effort that has clearly gone into making this game as just incredibly beautiful as it is. So Thumper's gameplay is simple, but simple doesn't always mean easy. In fact, it very rarely means easy. In Thumper, and incidentally yes, I'm going to keep saying that name until it makes you uncomfortable, you die in 2 hits. It's hard because sometimes the game gets very, very fast. Like, without sound you would not be able to comprehend what's going on fast. The average human reaction time is 0.25 seconds. In the harder levels of Thumper, you have less than that, but the rhythm gets into your head. You hear what's coming next, and you're already reacting before you've passed the first point. The atmosphere is electric, and it all comes to a T in the sections where you've just completed something really, really difficult, and maybe it took you a good few tries. But the game eases back into this almost Blade Runner sounding mellow, subdued tone. It calms you down and allows you to collect your thoughts before the next onslaught of sight and sound batters you to the ground. Thumper is cruel but fair. If you died, it's your own fault, and you really have to pay attention to the rhythm. But to be honest, saying that makes it sound like a conscious decision, which it really isn't. As I said, the sound gets into your head, it's infectious, and I've come away from a play session with Thumper humming beats and just knowing how they'll play out in gameplay. It's infectious and it's downright brilliant. Thumper is nothing like Dark Souls. That should go without saying. I mean, look at how different these games are. Yes, both games are hard, and both games rely on a thick atmosphere to immerse the player in the world, but the gameplay and the circumstances under which that gameplay is catalysed are just so different. See my earlier point? Dark Souls needs about 8 exercise books worth of lore just for one boss. But Thumper offers you no explanation or reason for what you're doing, other than it is a video game and you want to keep playing this video game what you paid money for. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think if Thumper had tried to come up with some contrived explanation for, well, this, then it would have got weird, and probably would have felt contrived and forced. This is where my problem with this fucking stupid article arises. I'm sorry, David, but it's true. Thumper and Dark Souls are so different. You cannot recommend one to someone based on them previously struggling with the other. There's no guarantee that they'll enjoy the type of game that Thumper is. Now, This particular news article didn't refer to Thumper as the Dark Souls of rhythm games, although some people... No, this article makes a recommendation based on a reader potentially finding Dark Souls too challenging, which, although it is the point of Dark Souls, I can understand. However, if someone wanted, for example, a vast story with lots of cool fantasy characters but found Dark Souls too challenging, recommending Thumper to them would be a huge mistake, because that's not what Thumper is. Now, if the article was something like, try The Witcher 3 if you can't handle Dark Souls, that would make sense, because the core gameplay of The Witcher 3 is just similar enough to Dark Souls. There's more exploration, downtime, crafting, and much more open storytelling, but it's just similar enough that someone trying to get into Dark Souls could use it as a way in. Now, what I'm not saying is The Witcher 3 is the Dark Souls of open-world role-playing games, because that's fucking stupid. Dark Souls doesn't work in an open-world sense, or at least not the kind of open world that you get in The Witcher 3 or Skyrim. I suppose Dark Souls is a sort of open world, but it's just not the same, and that is definitely for the better. However, the core gameplay of The Witcher 3, although unique and different, is close enough to the hacky-slashy, exploration-based type gameplay in Dark Souls that someone who's struggling with the immense challenge and incomprehensible story might enjoy it as a substitute until they can really sink their teeth into Dark Souls. The other game I would recommend to someone struggling with Dark Souls is Monster Hunter World, as I mentioned it earlier, because although core gameplay is definitely different to it, it's definitely got a bit more of a meaty challenge than The Witcher 3, but still less so than Dark Souls. Good God, Dark Souls, will I ever shut up about it? Well, no, probably not, but for a little bit, just for you, yes, David, I'll stop mentioning Dark Souls. You should play Thumper. Yes, you. It doesn't matter if you are a Dark Souls veteran, if you're struggling to get into your first Souls game, or if you had never even heard of it before this video. You should absolutely play Thumper. It's good if you've got a busy working day and don't have too much time to play video games, because each level, it's relatively short and you can stop at any time if you need to. It's supremely atmospheric and possesses a meaty enough challenge that you won't be done with it in a single afternoon, but also isn't so hard that it'll take you months and months to beat, and isn't so vast and long that it'll take you months and months to beat. In my Red Dead Redemption 2 review, I said something along the lines of, it's hard to give a game like Red Dead 2 an arbitrary score out of 10, because in something so huge that attempts to do so much, inevitably there'll be something that people won't enjoy. Now, for example, I absolutely loved the silky smooth animations and general exploration on horseback, but I didn't enjoy how hard it was to navigate the world without the minimap, because that's something I wanted to be able to do, but it's just not really designed with that in mind. It's possible, it's definitely not what Red Dead 2 was built with. Someone else, on the other hand, may have really enjoyed that they could just turn their brain off and ride from location to location following a red line on a map. But maybe they really hated how, when looting a building, Arthur took forever to lean down, open a drawer, pick it up, and it was a really slow, methodical process. And that just wasn't what they wanted. However, a game like Thumper or Mario only sets out to do one or two things, and then it becomes much easier to explain whether or not the game is good, because it's a simple case of, does it achieve what it sets out to do? And in Thumper's case, the answer is a resounding yes. I mean, the game runs at a slick 60 FPS, even on consoles. It feels smooth, slick, responsive, and it's so much fun to speed along, smashing through obstacles at 8 times the speed of light. So, although I am still not advocating for giving a game an arbitrary score with numbers, what I am saying is that this game is fucking good. And it's objectively good at that. You may not enjoy the game. That's a difference that I want to point out. Just because it's objectively good, it was a success, you may not enjoy it. And that's absolutely okay, because there's a lot of people in the world, and people have different opinions. Wow, that's so epic, guys. Some people don't enjoy The Witcher, or The Elder Scrolls, or Dark Souls because they just don't enjoy a fantasy setting. Some people don't enjoy games like Call of Duty because they think that playing a game to follow orders and mindlessly kill anyone who isn't 90% bald eagle is inherently fucking stupid. So although you may not enjoy Thumper, even you might, it's absolutely worth a shot to find out. Now, I do need to explain that I got worked up about this whole X is the Dark Souls of Y, or X is like Dark Souls, but I don't have a problem with comparing games to one another. In fact, I think it's very important to create a sense of what genre a game is in. For example, saying Red Dead Redemption is like Grand Theft Auto but with horses makes sense. It's brief, informative, and just plain effective. However, something like this is wrong. It's just lazy more than anything, and I appreciate that the person who wrote this isn't a paid critic, they're a moron, but it upsets me as an aspiring critic to see that we have basic shorthand that is used to describe things when technically it's not even correct. Yes, Sekiro is like Dark Souls but with stealth, because it has the other aspects of Dark Souls that make it that way: environmental storytelling, thick atmosphere, challenging and unforgiving combat, etc. But describing it that way is doing both Sekiro and Dark Souls an injustice by being unable to explain why they're good based on their own merits, and instead we have to gesture vaguely to something else with a reputation of its own and say, meh, it's a bit like that. Yes, reviewing Sekiro and more so Bloodborne, the comparison to Dark Souls is going to come up, and that's okay. You are absolutely allowed to compare games, much in the way a comparison between Red Dead and GTA is going to come up. But that's okay. We just shouldn't rely on it as the crux of our statements. We have to elaborate in unique ways about these things. I think, for a better explanation of what I'm trying to say, check out hbomberguy's video on Bloodborne. It's honestly brilliant, and I hope that someday I can make content more like that, that's more focused and, makes sense. If you're looking for something that actually does come up with unique ways of describing things, Yahtzee Crowshaw in his show Zero Punctuation at the Escapists is terrific and continues to come up with creative ways to talk about his penis. I'll leave links to both of them in the description below. And last but not least, I do want to say a quick thank you to any of you for indulging me and sitting through this probably quite disorganised rant. If you enjoyed it, you could think about coming back for some more content in the future, even subscribing, I'd be very grateful. I'm hoping for my next video to be on the original Ratchet & Clank from 2002, and hopefully comparing it to the 2016 reboot. I'm not entirely sure how long it's going to take. We'll see. I'm going to try and get it out as soon as I can, but equally I'm going to put some love and care into these videos, make something I'm proud of. Unlike the Subnautica video. I genuinely thought that was a clever title, because it was like, it was designed to be not a horror game, but it's really scary, so it wasn't made as a horror game. Clever. That was shit. Anyway, I'll stop waffling, and I'll let you get back to browsing the internet. Thank you, and good night.